What's going on, everybody? Anthony Cervino here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube channel with my top 5 must-start players for NFL Week 6. And stay here till the end because the final 2 players are players that you may have overpaid for and they may not be delivering up to expectations, but Week 6 is the week they absolutely positively go off. But let's start with my first player. It's Tony Pollard, the outstanding running back from the Tennessee Titans. And Pollard this year, going into last week's bye, he's been sensational. Over 15.2 PPR points in 3 out of 4 games. He is getting the touches, 18.5 per game to be exact. He's getting targeted as well. He's had at least 4 targets in 3 out of 4 games played. He's actually running really well. This isn't the Tony Pollard last year in Dallas coming off the injury. This is a healthy Tony Pollard, and he's paying dividends for what the Tennessee Titans paid him in the offseason. A 78.7 positive run rate. That's 79th percentile using the outstanding tools here at RotoWire.com. 68.7% of his yards are coming after contact. He's also getting 14% of the team targets. He's the do-it-all back, and I get that Tajay Spears is also involved, but Pollard is the guy. We need to follow the money a little bit more often when we're targeting these fantasy football assets. Pollard has 2 rushing touchdowns on the year. He's getting it done on the ground as a receiver out of the backfield and coming out of the bye. He's going to be fresh, and he gets an outstanding matchup against the Indianapolis Colts. And this Indianapolis Colts defense, you can gash him on the ground. You can gash him in the air. It's the Achilles heel of this football team. And so far this season, fantasy running backs have had their way. 2 different running backs have gone over 25 PPR points. Tank Bigsby last week, Joe Mixon back in week 1, and at least one running back in every game the Colts have played this year have finished with double-digit PPR points. In fact, last week, we saw both Bigsby and Travis Etienne get at least 12 PPR points apiece. That bodes really well for what we could potentially see from Tony Pollard. He's an absolute smash play this week. Let's go to a wide receiver I really like, and that is Chris Godwin. And now, Chris Godwin, he gets the Saints. What do we know historically about the New Orleans Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Usually, these aren't great games for Mike Evans. That means we could see a really nice game from Chris Godwin. And let's go down history lane. Chris Godwin has played the New Orleans Saints in his career 14 times. In 10 of those games, he finished with double-digit PPR points. In fact, he accomplished that feat in 5 straight games. He's also gone over 24.1 PPR points in this matchup 3 different times in his career. And one time last season, he had 19.4. The other time, he had 17.1. And now he gets to do it again. And I absolutely think we see another outstanding performance from Chris Godwin because the New Orleans Saints, this secondary is a little bit leaky. They're hard to trust sometimes. We saw Juju Smith-Schuster go for over 100 receiving yards on Monday Night Football. We saw Travis Kelce get going. So there's absolutely positively production to be had. And I know New Orleans is a tough place to play, but this is a familiar place for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Chris Godwin, who, oh, by the way, is getting 26.3% of the team targets. That is 93rd percentile. He's being targeted on 26.7% of his team routes, and he's running on average 2.7 yards per route run with an 80% catch rate. It's all there for Chris Godwin. He's had at least 8 targets in all but 1 game this season. That 1 game he fell below that number was last week against the Atlanta Falcons. A little bit of a tough defense. And he still managed 5 of 6 targets for 64 yards and 11.6 PPR points. But I think this is going to be a complete smash game for Chris Godwin. Let's go to another must-start wide receiver. I love Terry McLaurin this week. And I'll be honest, I wasn't that big on Terry McLaurin this offseason. I didn't know we were going to get it at Jaden Daniels. I didn't think Jaden Daniels was going to look like the second coming. And it didn't start out all rosy. Obviously, the first 2 games of the year, it looked horrific. Under 8 PPR points for McLaurin the first 2 games. 12 total targets, but since then it's like the floodgates open. We are seeing Terry McLaurin 3 straight games over 15.4 PPR points. In 2 out of the past 3 games, he's caught exactly 4 passes and he's gone for over 100 yards receiving. He has 2 touchdowns as well in his past 3 games. And now he gets the easiest matchup against the Baltimore Ravens that he's had all season. This Ravens secondary, talk about an Achilles heel. They struggle to stop enemy wide receivers. Look what happened last week. We saw both Jamar Chase, 41.3, T. Higgins, 29.3. Chase, almost 200 yards receiving and 2 scores. Higgins, 83 and 2. We have seen 4 different wide receivers finish with over 20.8 PPR points against this football team this season so far. And if you go game to game, there's double-digit PPR point scoring all over the place. This secondary is going to be exploited this week because the Ravens and Washington, these teams are eerily similar when it comes to how they play offensive football. They both have the RPO threat, running dual threat quarterback, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels. They both have an outstanding running game, and they both have the ability to take the top off of the enemy defense. I think we're going to see fireworks in this game on both sides of the ball. And if you want a little bit of a sneaky start, I like Zay Flowers as well in this matchup. There's a little bit of an extra one for you. Now let's move on. But before we move on, if you like content like this, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the alert icon so you can be notified anytime we go live to answer your questions or we drop outstanding content just like this. Now, remember I said at the top of the video, we have 2 players, elite players. They're not really paying dividends, but I think it starts this week. We're going to go with Ceedee Lamb. Ceedee Lamb is an absolute must start. I think he's going to go off this week. Let's go into the history books. Last year, for example, we know Ceedee Lamb was a monster last season, but in the first 6 games of the year, Ceedee Lamb only had 1 pop game with over 20 PPR points. He had 25.3 back in week 2. Every other game under 18. And then he starts going off starting in week 8, and he never looked back. Well, this year, he's played in 5 games. He's had 1 game over 20 PPR points, 23.6 against the Giants in week 4. Every other one under 19. That's not what we paid a top overall pick, a second overall pick, a third overall pick for. We paid for the guy we got last season. We're going to get that starting this week. He gets the Detroit Lions. And what did Ceedee Lamb do against the Detroit Lions last year? The same matchup. And guess what? The Lions secondary is not much better. The Lions secondary on paper, they're one of the worst. They're one of the worst. They're the second easiest matchup for enemy wide receivers. And last year, Ceedee Lamb goes for 42.2 PPR points. Targeted 17 times. Hauling in 13 for 227 a touchdown. Even took 1 rush for 5 yards. This is the matchup where the floodgates open and Ceedee Lamb goes on the tear, because if you pay attention, if you're looking at the same things I am, the Dallas Cowboys rested away. They have the easiest running back and wide receiver matchups. We're rolling up Ceedee Lamb this week with the utmost confidence. Let's close this thing out. Bijian Robinson, talk about a disappointment. Some of us, including me, paid a top 3 overall pick for him. And we haven't had that return. Bijian, under 16.2 PPR points in every single game. To be fair, some of the matchups were tough. Pittsburgh, top 5. KC, number 1. You know, the usage the past 2 games hasn't been there, but he has been appearing on the injury report a little bit. It starts now. You get the Carolina Panthers this week, and this is a matchup on paper. This is the easiest matchup for enemy running backs. And if Bijan can't get it going now, I don't know when it's going to get going for Bijan Robinson. Now, Bijan, to be fair, played this team twice last year. Week 15 didn't fare very well. Bijan, 7 for 11 as a runner, 1 catch for 3 yards, right? That's not going to get done. But in the other game these two teams played, Bijan popped for 20.3 PPR points, 10 for 56 as a runner, caught all 6 of his targets for 27 yards and a touchdown. I'm expecting that type of a performance from Bijan Robinson on Sunday. Listen, he's still getting 17 touches per game, and I get Allgeier's getting some as well, but this really is a Bijan Robinson type of game. 23.9 broken tackle rate, 69.8% of his yards after contact. It's all there. He just needs to get going. And sometimes, in order to get these studs going, you need what we call a get-right matchup. And when it comes to the running back position, there's no better get-right matchup than what he has in front of him. Against the Carolina Panthers, they've been smashed and gashed by running backs all season long. In fact, they have given up over 20 PPR points to 4 different running backs this season. DeAndre Swift, come on down. Even Roschon had 14. Alvin Kamara, come on down. J.K. Dobbins, come on down. Chase Brown, and come on down. Even Zach Moss, that game had 17.8. There's enough room here for Bijan to go off and Tyler Allgeier to get some too. We're absolutely smash starting Bijan Robinson.